Hello, lovely people. So we're on chapter 13 of Max Heindel's Rosicrucian Cosmo conception. Back to the Bible. In our age, the missionary spirit is strong. The Western churches are sending missionaries all over the world to convert the people of every nation to a belief in their creeds. Nor are they alone in proselytizing efforts. The East has commenced a strong invasion of Western fields, and many Christians who have become dissatisfied with the creeds and dogmas taught by the clergy and impelled to search for truth to satisfy the demands of the intellect for an adequate explanation of the problems of life, have familiarized themselves with, and in many cases accepted, the Eastern teachings of Buddhism and Hinduism, etc. From an occult point of view, this missionary effort, whether from east to west or vice versa, is not desirable because it's contrary to the trend of evolution. The great leaders of humanity who are in charge of our development give us every aid necessary to that end. Religion is one of these aids, and there are excellent reasons why the Bible, containing not only one, but both the Jewish and Christian religions, should have been given to the West. If we earnestly seek for light, we shall see the supreme wisdom which has given us this double religion, and how no other religion of the present day is suitable to our peculiar needs. To this end, we will in this chapter touch again upon certain points previously brought out in various places and connections. In the Polarian, Hyperborean and Lemurian epochs, the task of leading humanity was a comparatively easy one, for man was then without mind. But when that disturbing element came in during the first part of the Atlantean epoch, he developed cunning, which is the product of the mind unchecked by the spirit. Cunning acts as an aid to desire, regardless of whether the desire is good or bad, whether it will bring joy or sorrow. In the middle of the Atlantean epoch, the spirit had drawn completely into its vehicles and commenced to work in the mind to produce thought and reason. The ability to trace a given cause to its inevitable effect, and to deduce from a given effect the cause which produced it. The faculty of reasoning or logic was to become more fully developed in the Orion epoch, and therefore the original Semites, the fifth race of the Atlantean epoch, were a chosen people to bring out that germinal faculty to such a ripeness that it would be impregnated into the very fibre of their descendants, who would thus become the new race. To transmute cunning into reason proved no easy task. The earlier changes in man's nature had been easily brought about. He could then be led without difficulty because he had no conscious desire, nor did he have a mind to guide him. But by the time of the original Semites, he had become cunning enough to resent limitations on his liberty and to circumvent repeatedly the measures taken to hold him in line. The task of guiding him was all the more difficult because it was necessary he should have some liberty of choice, that he might in time learn self-government. Therefore, a law was enacted which decreed immediate rewards for obedience and instant punishment for disregard of its provisions. Thus was man taught, coaxed and coerced into reasoning in a limited manner, that the way of the transgressor is hard, and that he must fear God or the leader who guided him. Out of all who were chosen as seed for the new race, but few remained faithful. That sentence doesn't quite make sense. Most of them were rebellious, and so far as they were concerned, entirely frustrated the purpose of the leader by intermarrying with the other Atlantean races, thus bringing inferior blood into their descendants. This is what is meant in the Bible, where the fact is recorded that the sons of God married the daughters of men. For that act of disobedience were they abandoned and lost. Even the faithful died, according to the body, in the desert of Gobi, the wilderness. In Central Asia, the cradle of our present race, they reincarnated as their own descendants, of course, and thus inherited the promised land, the earth as it is now. They are the Orion races, in whom reason is being evolved to perfection. The rebellious ones, who were abandoned, are the Jews, of whom the great majority are still governed more by the Atlantean faculty of cunning than by reason. In them, the race feeling is so strong that they distinguish only two classes of people, Jews and Gentiles. They despise the other nations and are in turn despised by them for their cunning. It's not denied that they give to charity, but it's principally, if not exclusively, among their own people, and rarely internationally, as was done in the case of the earthquake disaster in Italy, where barriers of creed, race and nationality were forgotten in the human feeling of sympathy. In such cases as that and the San Francisco disaster, the inner spiritual nature of man becomes more in evidence than under any other circumstances, and the close observer may then discern the trend of evolution. The fact then becomes manifest that, though in the stress of ordinary life our actions may deny it, nevertheless at heart we know and acknowledge the great truth that we are brothers, and the hurt of one is really felt by the all. Such incidents, therefore, point out the direction of evolution. The control of man by reason must be succeeded by that of love, which at present acts independent of and sometimes even contrary to the dictates of reason. The anomaly arises from the fact that love, at present, is rarely quite unselfish, and our reason is not always true. In the new Galilee, the coming sixth epoch, love will become unselfish and reason will approve its dictates. Universal brotherhood shall then be fully realized, each working for the good of all, because self-seeking will be a thing of the past. That this much to be desired end may be attained, it will be necessary to select another chosen people from the present stock to serve as a nucleus from which the new race shall spring. This choosing is not to be done contrary to the will of the chosen. Each man must choose for himself. He must willingly enter the ranks. Races are but an evanescent feature of evolution. Before the end of the Lemurian epoch, there was a chosen people, different from the ordinary humanity of that time, who became the ancestors of the Atlantean races. From the fifth race of those, another chosen people was drawn, from which the Orion races descended, of which there must have been 5, and will be 2 more. Before a new epoch is ushered in, however, there must be a new heaven and a new earth. The physical features of the earth will be changed and its density decreased. There will be one race at the beginning of the next epoch, but after that, every thought and feeling of race will disappear. Humanity will again constitute one vast fellowship, regardless of all distinctions. Races are simply steps in evolution which must be taken, otherwise there will be no progress for the spirits reborn in them. But though necessary steps, they are also extremely dangerous ones, and are therefore the cause of grave concern to the leaders of mankind. They call these 16 races the 16 paths to destruction, because, while in previous epochs the changes came after such enormous intervals that it was easy to get the majority of the entities in line for promotion, it's different with the races. They are comparatively evanescent, therefore extra care must be taken that as few of the spirits as possible become enmeshed in the fetters of race. This is exactly what happened to the spirits reborn in the Jewish race bodies. They attach themselves so firmly to the race that they are drawn back into it in successive births. Once a Jew, always a Jew, is their slogan. They have entirely forgotten their spiritual nature and glory in the material fact of being Abraham's seed. Excuse me. Therefore, they are neither fish nor flesh. They have no part in the advancing Aryan race, and yet they are beyond those remnants of the Lemurian and Atlantean peoples which are still with us. They have become a people without a country, an anomaly among mankind. Because of their bondage to the race idea, their one-time leader was forced to abandon them and they became lost. That they might cease to regard themselves as separate from other peoples, other nations were stirred up against them at various times by the leaders of humanity, and they were led captive from the country where they had settled, but in vain. They stubbornly refused to amalgamate with others. Again and again they returned in a body to their arid land. Prophets of their own race were raised up, who mercilessly rebuked them and predicted dire disaster, but without avail. As a final effort to persuade them to cast off the fetters of race, we have the seeming anomaly that the leader of the coming race, the great teacher Christ, appeared among the Jews. This still further shows the compassion and wisdom of the great beings who guide evolution. Among all the races of the earth, none other was lost in the same sense as the Jews. None other so sorely needed help. To send them a stranger, not one of their own race, would have been manifestly useless. It was a foregone conclusion that they would have rejected him. As the great spirit known as Booker T. Washington, incarnated among the Negroes, to be received by them as one of themselves, and thus enabled to enlighten them as no white man could. So the great leaders hoped that the appearance of Christ among the Jews as one of their own might bring them to accept him and see his teachings, and thus draw them out of the meshes of the race bodies. But sad it is to see how human prejudice can prevail. He came unto his own, and they chose Barabbas. He did not glory in Abraham, nor any other of their ancient traditions. He spoke of another world, of a new earth, of love and forgiveness, and repudiated the doctrine of an eye for an eye. He did not call them to arms against Caesar. Had he done so, they would have hailed him as a deliverer. In that respect he was misunderstood, even by his disciples, who mourned as greatly over their vanished hope of an earthly kingdom as over the friend slain by Roman hands. The rejection of Christ by the Jews was the supreme proof of their thraldom to race. Thenceforth all efforts to save them as a whole by giving them special prophets and teachers were abandoned, and as the futility of exiling them in a body had been proven, they were as a last expedient scattered among all the nations of the earth. Despite all, however, the extreme tenacity of this people has prevailed even to the present day. The younger generation is commencing to marry outside the race. In time, an increasing number of bodies with fewer and fewer of the race characteristics will thus be provided for the incarnating spirits of the Jews of the past. In this manner will they be saved in spite of themselves. They became lost by marrying into inferior races. They will be saved by amalgamating with those more advanced. As the present Orion races are reasoning human beings capable of profiting by past experience, the logical means of helping them is by telling them of past stages of growth and the fate that overtook the disobedient Jews. Those rebels had a written record of how their leaders had dealt with them. It set forth how they'd been chosen and rebelled. Their leaders had dealt with them, and they were punished, but they were yet hopeful of ultimate redemption. That record may be profitably used by us, that we may learn how not to act. It's immaterial that, in the course of ages, it has become mutilated, and that the Jews of today are still under the delusion of being a chosen people. The lesson that may be drawn from their experience is none the less valid. We may learn how a chosen people may harass their leader, frustrate his plans, and become bound to a race for ages. Their experience should be a warning to any future chosen people. This Paul points out in unmistakable terms. Hebrews chapter 3-4. For if the word spoken by angels was steadfast, and every transgression and disobedience received a just recompense of reward, how shall we escape if we neglect so great a salvation? And Paul was speaking to Christians. For the Hebrews to whom he wrote this were converted, had accepted Christ, and were people whom he expected would, in some future life, be among the new chosen people, who would willingly follow a leader and evolve the faculty of love and spiritual perception, the intuition which shall succeed self-seeking and reason. The Christian teaching of the New Testament belongs particularly to the pioneer races of the Western world. It's being specially implanted among the people of the United States, for as the object of the new race of the sixth epoch will be the unification of all the races, the United States is becoming the melting pot, where all the nations of the earth are being amalgamated, and from this amalgamation will the next chosen people, the nucleus, be chiefly derived. Those spirits from all countries of the earth who have striven to follow the teachings of the Christ, consciously or otherwise, will be reborn here, for the purpose of giving them conditions suitable for that development. Hence the American-born Jew is different from the Jew of other countries. The very fact that he has been reborn in the Western world shows that he is becoming emancipated from the race spirit, and is consequently in advance of the crystallized Old World Orthodox Jew, as were his parents, or they would not have conceived the idea of severing the old ties and moving to America. Therefore, the American-born Jew is the pioneer who will prepare the path with his compatriots, which will follow later. Thus we will see that the Bible contains the teaching peculiarly needed by the Western peoples, that they may be taught a lesson by the awful example of the Jewish race, as recorded in the Old Testament, and learn to live by the teachings of the Christ in the New, willingly offering up their bodies as a living sacrifice upon the altar of fellowship and love. Okay, that's the end of chapter 13. I hope you enjoyed that, and I will see you at chapter 14.